When it comes to gardening, landscaping, or really perfecting any sort of trade, it is always really important to have the right tools. Having the right tools makes all the difference. Suddenly, a process that could be really time-consuming, tricky, or challenging can turn into a walk in the park. Think about a carpenter trying to build a shelf without a saw, a hammer, and nails. Think about a landscaper trying to build a landscape without a soil and a spade. And the same goes for indoor gardeners. When it comes to looking after an indoor jungle, having the right tools makes all the difference. Not just when it comes to having success with your plants, but also when it comes to making plant care as enjoyable and efficient as possible. And in today's video, I want to share with you all of the products and tools that I use to make my life a little bit easier. Hey everybody, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. The intro said it all. Today we're talking about products I use on a regular basis in my plant journey. And I would like to split them into two categories. And I'm seeking inspiration for my conditions versus care concept, right? Conditions are things like light, airflow, heat, and humidity, and the conditions set the plant's growth potential. It's set in the plant's DNA as to what conditions the plant prefers to really thrive. And then there's care, and with care, we're realizing the potential that the conditions have set. Care are things like watering, providing your plant with support, nutrient provision, pest treatment, and so on. And when it comes to care, we have a little bit more flexibility, which means there's more variety around the products that we can use. There's no right or wrong. Okay, before we get started, I have to make a few disclaimers because every time I talk about products, things get a little bit, I wouldn't say heated, but a little bit uncomfortable in the comment section, because as soon as we're talking about products, we're also talking about money. And as soon as money is involved, people get nasty. Some of these companies have sent me their products for free so I can test them. Some of these companies might have also paid me to do videos reviewing their product. They're paying me for my effort in putting together a piece of content. They're not paying me for my opinion. My opinion will always be based on my proof is in the pudding method. If I use a product for 2 or 3 years and it helps me yield the results that I want, then I'm gonna be comfortable recommending that product to you because it is actually delivering results, whether that company pays me or not. There's also plenty of products where the company is not paying me for their endorsement, but it just works. So I will pass on my recommendation. That is the bottom line. If I get a product for free, but it's not working and I wouldn't use it in my own plant care journey, I will also not recommend it to you. Keep in mind that the list of products that I'm gonna advertise is limited to my experience, and my experience is growing plants in Australia. I don't know what products are available outside of Australia. If there's a product that I use here that I am aware of being available in other markets, I will let you know. But if I don't say anything, it just means that I don't know. And I appreciate that you guys are often asking me for my opinion, or you're asking me if I'm aware of a supplemental product in a different market. But if you live in America and you don't know about the product, how am I supposed to know about the product if I don't even live there in the first place? Everything I know will be in this video. So if I'm not talking about it, it's probably because I'm unaware. But hopefully, when I talk about these products, I'm bringing across the principle behind it and why I use them. So hopefully you can go ahead and try and find a supplement for that product in case it's not available where you are. Also, this is not a ranking of these are the perfect products and you must use them, and if you use any other products, you will not achieve the same results. As I mentioned in the intro with the conditions versus care, when it comes to care, we have a whole lot of flexibility. So somebody who uses a lot of semi-hydro might use very different products to me. Somebody who grows Hoyas might use very different products to me. I mainly grow Aroids on moss poles, so obviously the products in relation to that will also be heavily influenced by the way that I like to grow in the first place. That doesn't mean that there aren't any other products that could be amazing. There's not a competition. I'm not ranking them. I'm not saying these are the only products you could possibly use. I'm purely telling you what I use as part of my plant journey. And then keep in mind that my plant journey is not just my hobby, it is also my profession. So I might do things in bulk, in larger quantities, in like a bigger volume, because it is ultimately also my job. So I understand that not everybody has like 100 moss poles. So maybe buying all of these things in bulk doesn't really make sense. And because you're not buying it in bulk and you're using smaller quantities, another product might be more suitable to you. Aesthetic preferences are also different, and so on. Anyway, I'm going on and on and on about disclaimers, but it is just in preparation for what's about to come. I know people get really, really antsy when it comes to products and spending money. Hence my hesitation in making this video in the first place. It's been requested continuously over the last 3 years, but now that I've done this long disclaimer, I feel like I'm ready. So, let's start off with the conditions part, and I'm just trying to put as many products as possible in via B-roll so that I don't have to move all the time. So conditions are light, temperature, humidity and airflow. So what products do I use to supplement these four? Let's start off with humidity. That's the easiest one. I actually use nothing to supplement humidity. My humidity, because I live in Sydney, is naturally quite high, so I don't really have the need for humidifiers. Plus, I have so many plants by now, they kind of create their own humid environment. Specifically, having a lot of moss poles. Well, obviously you don't want the water in the moss pole to evaporate because it's keeping you busy when it comes to watering. That water evaporating was absorbed by the air, which means that the air is been giving a little humidity boost. So basically, I have no product to share when it comes to boosting humidity, but there's lots and lots of humidifiers out there on the market. I personally just can't make a recommendation because I haven't used any. Airflow. Easy. I just use fans. I have a Dyson fan in my office. That is not just a fan that circulates the air, it will also serve as a heater during the colder months, which is gonna be our next point. When I talk about airflow over here, I'm not talking about wind, right? I'm not talking about a cold draft. I'm just talking about the air circulating within the room so that the air isn't stagnant, kind of like a wind in a rainforest. In the middle of the rainforest, it's not going to be super windy like it is on the edge of a cliff, right? Because it is sheltered by all of the things. By things I mean plants. It's really just about some slight movement of air so the air circulates and water droplets aren't accumulating on leaves causing fungal issues and so on. I also have a really nice, I think it's the DeLonghi 360 fan, and basically the cool thing about that is that as it rotates, it rotates 180 degrees, but it goes in both directions. So it's great for a small room where you have plants on all sides. It will just capture all 360 degrees of your room. At the end of the day, any fan will do. Let's not overcomplicate airflow. You just don't want it to be stagnant. And airflow can also help your plants grow stronger. I've noticed, for example, that the plants in my garden that are subject to a lot of airflow, aka wind out there, are usually growing a little more resilient because, well, they need to withstand the winds. So yeah, airflow, really important, but should be fairly easy to achieve. You can, of course, also just open your windows. That should give you some natural airflow, but then you might also bring in dry air or cold air and so on. So with a fan, you can control it a little bit better. That also applies to enclosed environments like my IKEA cabinet, for example. There's a little desk fan in there. I bought that one off Amazon, and that's actually been on 24/7 for the last 4 years. So that was one of the best purchases, and I do have a link for that one, pretty sure. I use heaters to supplement heat. I'm aiming to keep my house at least at 20 degrees Celsius throughout the whole year. Well, in summer it's naturally much hotter than that. In summer it's often like 28 or so. So then we actually use aircon to cool it back down, but not for the sake of the plant, but rather for the sake of us. Today we're focusing on planty products, not human products. So really for the plants themselves, I only use heating in about 2 to 3 months of the year, usually June to August. And it's really just to keep the room at 20 degrees. Now I don't think you can quite see it, but I have air conditioning in all of my rooms apart from the office. So the aircon works also as a heater in winter, and you can just set your desired temperature, let's say 22 degrees, and then the aircon will turn on and off to constantly keep it at 22 degrees. To facilitate the same thing in my office, I again use my Dyson fan, works in the same way. I can say I want this room to be 20 degrees and then the fan turns on and off to keep the room consistently at 20 degrees. Perfect. Because I also don't want to overheat the room, because the more hot air you produce, the drier it will get. Again, pretty simple concept. Any heater will do. Most European countries will probably have radiators in every single room, right? So any heating will do. You just need to be aware of the consequences that has on humidity. Warm air can absorb more moisture, which means that the relative humidity will go down. So if you heat your room, the humidity in the room will drop. That means that you then might have to supplement with a humidifier. Again, I'm quite lucky in Sydney, specifically during winter, the humidity is usually through the roof. So the heating, drying out the air and the room a little bit is actually desired to avoid fungal issues. And then lastly, the most important out of all of the conditions is light. And these days I live in a pretty dark place, so I heavily supplement with grow lights. But at the beginning of my plant journey, I actually tried to just rely on natural light. And it definitely worked, but I eventually kind of capped out because I was limited to whereabouts I can put plants, right? Well, I only have a few little corners of natural light, at least in the first place I ever lived in. But then eventually also because the light in itself isn't strong enough year-round to continuously help me mature my plants. I had a really nice apartment about 2 apartments ago that was amazing, and we got so much natural light, and in that apartment it was the easiest to rely on natural light. But I noticed that as soon as I started supplementing with grow lights, I have much more control over how much light they get, and it is more consistent throughout the whole year. So what grow lights do I use? I use a few of them these days. My favorite ones are definitely the ones you probably all know by now, the mother grow lights, the vertical lights. I used to use the plant spectrums, the black ones. They have now released a new version, the life spectrum, the silver ones, which I prefer because they're silver, because they're extendable and they're dimmable. So they dim in and out at nighttime, so kind of creating a sunrise and sunset. Makes it look nice for me. I prefer them from an aesthetic perspective. They're the same LED board technically, so the plants don't care. So I've used those lights for over 4 years now, and I love the vertical exposure of these lights. That is really what initially got me so excited about them. I grow plants vertically, so it makes sense for the light exposure to be vertically as well, so that the plant's leaves face forward. So they are my preferred light because they enable me to put all of my leaves against walls, even if the wall is really dark and far away from a window, and then put the light in the middle of the room so that the leaves face into the room, so that I get to see them and appreciate them. Aesthetics is on the forefront of everything what I do. The only negative aspect over here is really that you now have that light kind of in the middle of the room, so you know it's not necessarily the most convenient, but they're quite unintrusive. So I think from an aesthetic perspective, they're not bad. In a perfect world, I would actually love to have spotlights on the top of my ceiling and then have them shining down so that the lights are on the ceiling instead of on the floor, right? And they're not in my way. But as a renter, that is just not possible, unfortunately. Now, talking about these spotlights, there's another company that I work with, Soltech, that actually has these spotlights that I'm talking about, but again, I can't use them because I'm a renter. But they have other products that I like to use, and they are they serve a different purpose to the mother lights. I use the Aspect as well as the Vita Grow light bulb from Soltech. The Vita light bulb is in an IKEA lamp, but it's basically just a bulb that you buy, and then the Aspect is like a little pendant light, and I built my own like plant stand around it so that it can hang. Here's how I DIY'd a grow light stand. Honestly, I'm not very experienced when it comes to DIY, so I try to keep this as simple as possible. I headed to my Bunnings to grab a large wooden pole, quickset concrete and a nice looking pot. The idea is to attach the mounting bracket that came with the grow light to the pole. As a renter, I cannot drill anything into the walls, so I had to get creative. Then it's time to mix the quickset concrete and wait. After just 20 minutes, it was pretty set, but just to be sure, I left it sit overnight. The next morning it's time to connect the grow light. I certainly underestimated how heavy this will be, but on a positive, this is definitely not going anywhere. Now, the functionality is here, but I'm not happy with the aesthetic just yet. So I'm hoping that this rope hiding the plastic will make it look more organic, blending in with my existing interior design style. Happy growing! The fundamental difference over here is that it's a spotlight, right? It is coming from above and it shines down on a spotlight. So it's a much better setup for a plant like an oxalis, like this for example, that is also kind of round and lush and light coming from above than it is for a wall of poles, right? Imagine my wall of poles would have a spotlight coming from above. It would basically just mean that the top leaf gets all of the light and all of the leaves below get no more light. But because the light for my moss poles is coming from the front, all of the leaves get light and they have this nice display side rather than facing up. So those two basically have the same concept. It's a light source coming from above, just one is a bulb that you can put in an existing fitting, the other one is kind of the fitting in itself. I like both of them and I very much enjoy how warm the light is that they give up as well. It doesn't look bad. It's actually weird when I turn the grow lights off in my living room and it's suddenly so dark. I'm so used to the grow lights being on and actually giving a nice warm atmosphere, like it's a perpetual sunset. Very similar to the Soltec product, I also have started working with an Australian company called, oh my god, what are they called? Gathera Sunbulb. And it's basically the equivalent to the Aspect but produced by an Australian company. Soltec doesn't distribute to Australia. I think that basically the shipping is as expensive as the light in itself. So Soltec is an American-based company and they distribute, I do believe, internationally, but I think the shipping can become quite expensive depending on whereabouts they have fulfillment warehouses. They don't have one in Australia. So I was contacted by this local company and they have a very similar product, but it is produced locally, so more affordable for the Australians. Oh, and then I also have the Soltec Grove, which are tiny grow lights that are perfect for my IKEA cabinet. They're also dimmable and I have a full video on those as well. I actually have a full video on every single grow light that I have ever reviewed, and all of these grow lights I have used for many years by now. I think the Sunbulb I've used for maybe just half a year because it's a new product in itself, but it's working a treat already. So all of these grow lights, first of all, can be bought online, so they are linked in the description, but I have used them for a very long time and I very much enjoy them. Are there other grow light companies out there that you can use? Totally, for sure. Those are just the ones that I have been using ever since they reached out to me really early on in my journey, and I really enjoy their products and I enjoy the growth that I see with their products. So why fix what's not broken? When choosing between these grow lights, obviously keep in mind the cost. They are definitely not cost-effective products, but to me aesthetics is on the forefront. Not just the way that the product in itself looks, but also the way that the product makes my plants look. So keep that in mind when choosing between these products as well. Do you want the light to come from above, and what effect does that have on the foliage? Or do you want the product to come from the front, and what effect does that have on the foliage, and so on. Now with the grow lights I also use smart plugs. Now with the Motherlife Spectrum you can get the automated timer, and with the Gathera Sunbulb they also offer you to add a smart plug as part of the checkout process. With all the other ones I just purchased smart plugs so I can schedule the lights going on and off by themselves. I usually have all of my lights on for around about 14 hours a day. It's not the more the merrier. You can also do too much light. Plants also need darkness. But I also of course keep in mind my preference as a human. If we're sitting on the couch and it's dark outside already because it's 5 p.m. and we're just sitting under a grow light, that would kind of not make it feel really nice, right? So I do try and time the grow lights with the natural light outside as well, so it kind of makes sense, you know? So in winter I actually have the grow lights on for less time just because it makes just my personal preference, or I turn them on much earlier before I even wake up, so they still get their 14 hours, but I'm not sitting like in a grow lighty living room, let's say, right? But I suppose it also really depends on whereabouts your lights are. You know, in my plant room, for example, I don't care, they can be on whenever I want, and so on, right? So but ultimately I don't think I even have just one type of smart plug. I think by now I have like 3 or 4 different ones, which isn't the greatest because I have 3 or 4 different apps that I need to schedule and so on. But Suppose once you set up the schedule once, it's fine. Definitely have no preferred recommendation when it comes to smart plugs. I just go to Bunnings and I buy the cheapest one. And then last thing in relation to conditions is humidity readers, humidity and temperature readers. I actually have a couple. I have these ones, they're from Goivy, and I think I just bought them on Amazon. But then VivoSun has also sent me one recently. And I tested that out and it's working a treat. It's basically the same principle, just the VivoSun also has an external probe that I can put in my IKEA cabinet. Because my IKEA cabinet is such a high humidity environment, these little ones over here were always just dying, like the screen would break and then the batteries would leak because they're not meant to be in a 100% humidity environment, right? So I found it much better with the new VivoSun one where I have the actual display on top of the cabinet and there's just a little probe going into the cabinet to actually measure the humidity and the temperature. This is so essential because it tells you whether or not you need to work on your conditions in the first place. Maybe your conditions are naturally great and you don't have to heat and or provide additional humidity and so on, right? So this is really, really good. And both of them that I've got, the Goivy and the VivoSun one, they both also come with an app and then it actually stores the data and shows you the data. So you can actually look at it over the course of last month. What's the ups and downs, what's the fluctuations and so on, right? Because obviously it only gives you like a reading at one point in time. For example, this just set in the direct sun over there. So it's a bit warmer and it's a little drier than it actually is in here just because the sensor was hit by the direct sun. And then okay, technically we could also say that the IKEA cabinet is part of the conditions because the IKEA cabinet is basically just an enclosed space where I'm in control of these conditions, right? I have a fan to circulate airflow, I have grow lights in there to create light, but the grow lights also produce heat, and then the humidity is created by all of the plants in there and by insulating it so the humidity can't escape. So technically the IKEA cabinet in itself is also a product that enables me to create conditions that then set the potential for these baby plants. Inside my IKEA cabinet, I just have a grid. At the back, it's a metal grid, and I found that one at Bunnings. Before I had the metal grid in my IKEA cabinet, I actually had the IKEA pegboard, but that pegboard is pressed wood and that got really, really moldy within just a couple of months because it's like a 99% humidity environment. Now the brackets that came with the pegboard I used to just now mount the grid on. So I got lucky that that's kind of a good fit, but to be honest, I'm not too sure how I would install just the grid otherwise. But you can always get creative, just kind of drill a hook into the back or something like that. I'm not too sure. And then the clips that I bought for the pegboard also happen to perfectly hook into the metal grid. So I got lucky on that front yet again. So that's kind of my IKEA cabinet setup, but I have a whole playlist on my IKEA cabinet where you also see the various iterations of the IKEA cabinet in that playlist. Alrighty, I think now we've well and truly covered the conditional aspect. So we've set the potential, let's now realize the potential, and let's talk about the products that help me realize that potential. Let's start off with the obvious one, pots, and apologies for them being so dirty. My preference is certainly using clear pots, or well, dirty clear pots. And at Bunnings, they come in 3 different sizes. There is, what's this, 10, I think this is 14, or I think it's technically 138 millimeters. Let's call it 14 centimeters. So 10 centimeters, 14 centimeters, and 20 centimeters. Those are the 3 sizes that they come in. And for the majority of my plant journey, I always gotten away with those 3 sizes because, you know, I like to push the boundaries a little bit. Of course, eventually some of my plants outgrew the 20 centimeter pot, and even with a chop and extend, I felt like 20 centimeters wasn't big enough. So some of my plants might also be in 25 centimeter pots, and I think my Thai is even in 40. They don't come in clear, they come in black at Bunnings, and I have to say it is a nightmare. As soon as I use a black pot, I'm so thrown off with my watering needs and all of that. The reason I use clear pots is because, first of all, it helps me assess the root health, but also it helps me assess the watering requirements. I can see whether or not there's condensation. I can see the color of the substrate. I mean, obviously you can also feel that, but it's very nice. I'm a visual person, so the clear pots really help me assess the root health and the watering requirements. It's been an absolute game changer, especially at the beginning of the journey. 6 years in, of course, I have like a bit of a feeling now, right, as to how much I need to water and when to water and so on. I know my plants quite well by now, but at the beginning, when you're still trying to figure things out, it's really hard to just guess what's going on in the pot, right? What's happening in the pot is actually the most important thing. If your plant is rooting and growing lots of nice roots, leaves will be inevitable. If your plant's root system is dying, death will be inevitable, right? So it's actually super important to understand what's going on with the root system, so you can also adjust. Maybe you'll realize that, oh, this was not the substrate for this plant, the roots don't seem to like it, and so on. Maybe you've done a bit of a risky, rough repot and you would love to spy on the roots to see whether or not your repot was successful, because it might be another month or so until you see a new leaf, right? And a month can be a long time if you're not too sure if you messed up or not. So love the clear pots, and it would be one of my #1 recommendations for new plant parents to really understand your plants and your plants' health a little bit better. Like, look at this, you can really see the roots. So I can see that, okay, there's not many roots in this pot whatsoever. It's definitely not root bound, not a need for a repot, right? So it comes in super handy. Same here, and just a little bit smaller. You can see the plant has some nice healthy roots, but still doesn't really look root bound, right? So it's just a little safety net. I always like to use pots with drainage because that's the way that I like to water. I like to really flush water through them, so all of these pots have decent drainage holes and dirt in them. Now, the only problem with see-through pots is that roots, not all of them, technically seek darkness, right? Roots are usually down in the ground. Of course, with some of my epiphytes or semi-epiphytes or hemi-epiphytes or whatever we want to call them, of course they grow up a tree, and as part of that, some of the roots are clinging onto the tree and hence are exposed to light. But most of the time, rule of thumb, roots prefer darkness. So clear pots aren't necessarily great for that. Plus the clear pots also encourage algae buildup within the pot, which isn't necessarily harmful in itself, but could become an issue if you let it get out of control. So what I do with these clear pots is, well, let's take this one. I put the clear pot in a heavy decorative planter, and that has a few purposes. First of all, the planter looks better. Second of all, the planter gives it stability. It's less likely to fall over because the planter makes it bottom heavy. For that, it is really preferred to have a nice snug fit and not have the pot move around too much in the planter. Thirdly, the planter catches excess water. This one is a great example because the pot really just hovers. I don't know if you can see this. When I put it down, the pot is the perfect size for the planter. So it sits on the edge over here, meaning that down here there's actually a little gap. So if I were to water this plant now, the moss pole or the pot or both or whatever, any excess water, obviously limited. If I've drowned this, it's going to sit in it. But if I just have a little bit of excess water dripping out, that's going to accumulate in the bottom of the planter rather than actually the pot sitting in it, right? So in this instance, it's also functional. It helps me water my plants without having to move the plant out of the pot. I don't need to take it out, let it drain. It can drain in its spot. Not all of my pots and planters are like that. Sometimes they sit inside the pot rather than hovering on the outer lip, if that makes sense. And then you just have to take the pot out, empty any excess water and then put it back, right? So it's also not a huge issue, but specifically with large plants, for example, my Monstera adansonii subspecies lineata is huge, taller than my door and so on. I try and avoid moving that plant where I can. So that one is definitely one of those that has this sort of pot and planter combination so that it's in the corner and I can just pour water down, and if I pour too much volume of water down that pole, I don't need to worry because it's just going to accumulate in that decorative planter at the bottom without the pot sitting in it. We're trying to avoid root rot by the pot and the potting medium sitting in standing water. So in this instance, it makes life so much easier. Instead of me having to move this plant all all the time. I only really move this out of its planter when it's time to take it out and hose it down, right? So it's a significant reduction in my efforts and a significant reduction in risk of anything going wrong. And then lastly, the decorative planter also provides that darkness that I was talking about earlier. So they're not just decorative, they're extremely functional. And I get most of my decorative planters from Bunnings because they're quite inexpensive and they're made from concrete. So they're just nice and heavy. But I've been doing this for 6 years. Over those 6 years, I have picked up lots and lots of planters everywhere. One here, one there, you know, wherever I might see people send me planters as well, you know, in birthday gifts, they give me planters and so on. So there's not one specific place where I get my planters from, but I would say that probably 80% or so are from Bunnings, for sure, because I just need so many of them, right? Like, I can't afford to spend $100 on each planter when I need like 50 of them, you know what I mean? Like, of course I'm gonna go with a cost-effective option, and I like them really simple and plain. Now, I've also done a video recently with Bunnings where I took 2 planters and I put them on top of each other to kind of elevate the pot. Let's DIY some hourglass pots. I grow plants for aesthetic reasons, so of course I'm always on the hunt for beautiful pots. I also like lifting pots off the floor because the closer to your eyes, the easier it is to enjoy that beautiful foliage in the first place. And the best and easiest way to do this is by just gluing 2 pots on top of each other. White is my preference as that doesn't distract from the plant itself, but Bunnings has a huge variety of pots available in all sorts of colors, shapes, textures, materials and sizes. Irrespective of your taste, you'll find something that suits you, like this or this. Maybe not this one. Elevate your plants with pots from your local Bunnings or online. Which adds another element to the planter's functionality, or well, at least to the planter's aesthetic, right? Now it's also a stand and a planter all in one. Most of my plants, and keep in mind we're also only really talking about my indoor plants. Outdoors I don't use that many planters, sometimes, but just for aesthetic purposes and so on. But over there, like, you know, because it rains frequently, drainage is more important. But indoors, I started using a different type of growing recently. Let me show you. Here we go. I started experimenting with a semi-hydro or hydro, I don't really know, whatever, a setup for my alocasias. Specifically, these alocasias are grown in moss, and then there is a lacquer reservoir, and all of this is within a glass. Now technically you could do this in a planter as well. It doesn't need to be clear, right? But I suppose the reason why you want it to be clear is so you can see the water reservoir and whether or not you need to water. And I've got a whole video on setting up a plant in this sort of setup. But basically recently, over the last half year or so, I have been collecting a lot of glasses. Now when I look for glasses, I want to make sure that it's a cylinder, a perfect cylinder, or maybe go a little bit wider at the top. You do not want the top to taper in, because eventually you have to take all of this out and put it in a bigger glass. So if it tapers in at the top, you will have issues once the plant gets a little bit root bound. So that's my only heads up, but it's still a fairly new approach to me. Now all of these glasses so far I've gotten from the op shop, from the second-hand store, from Vinny's, right? You'd be surprised how many amazing, beautiful, large glasses at really, really effective prices you can get over there. And I suppose, you know, I do like to reuse and recycle as much as I can, but I also don't want this to turn into an environmental thing, because you're gonna cancel me for the cable ties that I'm gonna use in 20 minutes. So let's ignore that aspect. But I've also noticed that op shops are really good for secondhand planters. I found really nice planters in these stores before, right? So would be my recommendation. I've also seen people use not glass, like a plastic, acrylic setup. Whatever works, right? Suppose the idea over here is that you just want to be able to see the reservoir. I have started putting the glasses in a planter to avoid algae buildup. So maybe I should just build like a little sleeve that is like removable, you know what I mean? Instead of wasting another planter, have like a little plastic sleeve or like a paper sleeve that looks nice, but you can also just quickly peel it off and look underneath. That could be a cool idea. I wish I would be more artsy and I could paint or something like that. Well, I'm not. Maybe I can print something. Yeah, Let's try that. I'll come up with an idea actually. That is actually such a good idea. Oh, I'm gonna go to Officeworks. Alright, moving on. And don't worry, we're gonna come back to the substrates within the pots in a hot minute. Let's move on to the obvious one, moss poles. I mainly use two types of support. I use my open style moss poles that I make myself, which are just a garden wire mesh, moss in the inside, it's sphagnum moss, and then cable ties to hold it all together. All products from Bunnings. Here's my super simple moss pole tutorial. I've been making my own moss poles for over 4 years now, and they really changed the plant hobby for me. I like to keep it simple using just 3 materials I get from Bunnings. A coated wire mesh for the structure, New Zealand sphagnum moss to fill it, and cable ties to hold it all together. The moss is a growing medium, so the moss pole isn't just a support stake, it's a vertical extension of the pot. In nature, these plants would grow up trees, but inside my house they climb up the pole, and as they climb, the plant grows roots into the pole. And the more roots, the better, enabling the plant to absorb more water and nutrients, growing big, healthy and strong. Take your plant hobby to the next level by making your own moss poles. Happy growing! And I've been making them myself for the last 6 years. Now, advantage of the open style moss pole is that you can make them yourself, you can make them in any shape, you can cut them, you can do whatever you want, right? You can make any length, any width, anything, and because you make them yourself, they're going to be the most cost-effective ones. I also think they look the nicest, they look somewhat organic. But because they're open, large exposure to the air, meaning that they also dry out somewhat quickly. It does give your environment a bit of a humidity boost, but if you live in a dry environment, I don't think this humidity boost is really going to make the difference, but it's going to make you really, really busy. So I often get these messages from people, oh my god, I have one moss pole and it's keeping me so busy. If you're really, really busy looking after your one moss pole, you most likely chose the wrong moss pole and you're watering it incorrectly. We'll be looking at watering in a sec as well. But yeah, I do love these. I don't have like a hard and fast rule when I choose these ones over the plastic back ones, but usually I choose these ones for plants that are in a spot where I actually see the full pole. I don't like looking at plastic in the back. And or I choose these for a plant that I feel like enjoys the aeration of the pole a little bit better. I think monsteras can sometimes really like that. But then it also depends on, am I growing the plant inside, outside? Is it going to be pushed up against the wall or not? If I push it against the wall, I'd rather have the plastic touch the wall than moist moss, right? There's a lot of different things that I consider when I ultimately make a decision what sort of moss pole I use. But sometimes I also just use whichever one I just have available, you know? But I've done a full video comparing the types of support, so I don't want to go on and on and on about it. It's just more like a show and tell. The other poles that I like to use are these plastic back poles. They are from Grow Vertical. Yes, they're Grow Vertical, but the company is called Grow Vertical. So when you ask me how I make them, I just get them like that. And it's my friend Tim that has the company, not Timmy Tim, the other Tim. And we've also visited his greenhouse before. And it's just a really simple pole. It's not over-engineered, and that's what I like about them. It's just a plastic backing and then a mesh at the front, and you cable tie them together. And because you only have 2 elements, you're in control of how large do you want the mesh to be. Make it narrower and the pole will get deeper. Make it wider and the pole will be more shallow, and so on, right? So you can play with the volume available in the pole and the size and the exposure to the air and so on by just cutting the mesh and the plastic backing to size. And that is my overarching recommendation for choosing a pole. Choose whatever suits you, choose whatever is available, choose whatever is cheap, but keep in mind, what are you going to do once the plant outgrows the pole? Can you easily take the pole apart? Can you cut the plant off the pole? Can you stitch the pole together afterwards and so on? What do you have flexibility when it comes to using the pole, right? Because you might start with a really small plant and then 3 years later you want to upgrade that pole, but maybe you're set in stone and you need to start all the way from the beginning. But I think I've recently really flogged that horse to death. Is that a saying? But I think I recently spoke a lot about this specific point that I'm trying to stress over here. Have that long-term vision. Think ahead before you put your plant on a pole. Is that pole going to give you the flexibility that you need in the long run? But yeah, basically those are the poles that I like to use. Those two. The Grow Vertical come in 3 different sizes. There's small, this is the Pro, and then there's the Fatty Long that I like to use for my really big plants that require a lot of potting medium. Main advantage of these is that due to the plastic backing, they don't dry out quite as quickly. So if you're one of those people that feels like you can't stay on top of watering your poles, then it might just be that your environment is too dry and you should really go with a plastic backed moss pole instead. But they can take a lot of volume, especially once I go onto the Fatty Long poles, the thick ones. They can take so much moss and so much volume, which is obviously great for the plant, but can get expensive trying to fill these poles in the end. Now I do use a veggie trellis, but I only use that for my Discoria discala. That's the only plant I kind of ever have the desire to use a veggie trellis with, because she doesn't have aerial roots, so there's no point in providing a growing medium within the pole. And I also use ironbark, but I use ironbark poles really only outdoors. I think you know how I feel about wooden poles and so on. I suppose you're on my channel for a reason. But yeah, if you're interested, again, there's a whole video where I compare the different supports, and I even created like a bit of a heat map where I basically make recommendations as to, you know, what pole I would use in what instance, and my recommendation at the end. So I think if you want to go deeper into that topic, that video will have everything you need. Now once the plant reaches the top of the moss pole, I extend the moss pole, and really the only other product I use to facilitate extensions are garden stakes. Those garden stakes just first of all, make the extension process easier, but also it keeps the 2 poles together and stops them from caving in, right? The garden stake is not gonna help the whole thing from falling over, but the garden stake is gonna ensure that the pole in itself doesn't cave in. Really important, again, I use a wire mesh. It's a coated wire mesh, so it doesn't rust, but it's wire. If you use a really thin plastic, your pole in itself is not going to have structural stability. But the garden stake can help with that, but ideally you have a structurally sound pole in the first place, and then you add a garden stake. But guess what? I have many videos on moss poles. That's kind of my thing, right? So I have a full video on moss poles. So check out the description down below. In the description, I'll either put product links to products, or I'll just put tutorials to products if I make them myself. I don't just use the garden stakes for pole extensions, I also use them for aesthetic reasons. One moment please. Alrighty, this is my Alocasia cuprea. She's an absolute beast. She's so heavy, it's hard to, I don't even know, I don't think you can see me anymore. Let me maybe take her out of the pot. Okay, she's an absolute beast, but really what I want to show you, can you see this here? There's a garden stake in here, and what I do is I use twine to tie each petiole to the garden stake to stop these leaves from being droopy and to create a nice display. This is purely aesthetic, doesn't necessarily have functionality, but I mean, aesthetics is what I do this for. So yeah, a really simple trick, but really makes the difference when it comes to making a beautiful plant that you have grown over many years actually look really, really good in your environment. My top tip is incorporate the garden stake at the time of repotting in anticipation for the Alocasia eventually needing that sort of staking up, rather than just slamming it in hindsight and potentially ruin some roots. Now this whole tying the petiole to the garden stake, I actually also do with moss poles. All of the ones I do it with are so big I cannot move them now, but basically what I can do is I can take a petiole and then tie the petiole to the moss pole using twine. So the same idea works with moss poles, just I don't need to add another garden stake in because, well, I already have the moss pole, which is basically a huge garden stake, which will fulfill the same purpose. Let's finally talk about substrates. Let's get this one out first because I think the other part's going to take a bit longer. Over here, my semi-hydro approach is just sphagnum moss with a lacquer reservoir, both from Bunnings. My moss poles are filled with sphagnum moss. However, I have previously, at least with the plastic back poles, also tried different mediums. I've tried poles with just cocoa chips, not cocoa coir, cocoa chips. They're like little chunks and they actually absorb quite a bit of water. At the end of the day, you want to fill your pole with a growing medium that can absorb water and nutrients and then release it to the plant as the plant grows into it. The problem with cocoa chips is that they lock out calcium and magnesium. So when you fertilize the substrate, the cocoa chips will absorb that and will not release it to your plants. So you can end up with plants looking a little bit bleached, a little bit faded because they don't have enough nutrients, but you can just provide extra nutrients to counteract that, right? So just be aware. I've also used my normal Aroid mix in my moss poles. Well, then they're not moss poles, then they're just grow poles, let's say. And that also worked, but it's obviously quite messy, you know, compared to moss. It's very nice and clean. So indoors, I pretty much just use moss for my poles. Now, the substrate over here is my own Aroid mix, and I also have a full tutorial on that, of course. But bottom line is my Aroid mix keeps changing, but the principles are always the same. I want to create a mix that has aeration and drainage so that the roots can breathe. Roots need oxygen. Specifically, those Aroid roots love oxygen. So they want aeration and drainage. They don't want to sit in water. But at the same time, you want the substrate to retain a little bit of nutrients and water, because ultimately that's the main purpose. The plant needs to absorb water, right? Grow roots into it and then absorb that water and the nutrients, right? Now the nutrients I provide via the watering, which is the next point. So I don't necessarily have a nutrient component within my mix, or that's not my priority. Really the priority is to create the right structure, having these four things in mind: aeration, drainage, water, and nutrient retention. Of course, a small plant wants less drainage and aeration and more water retention because it has really fine roots, than a really mature plant, for example, that prefers a more chunky mix. A Monstera with really thick roots might have a different requirement to, let's say, Alocasia over here that has fine water-loving roots, right? I mean, the Oxalis is not an Aroid, but super fine roots, so a completely different mix over here. At the end of the day, I do adjust my mix a little bit according to the plant, the type of plant and the maturity of the plant, but it's always a combination of bark, cocoa chips, perlite and pumice for the drainage and the aeration, and then the water retentive component is usually, well, the cocoa chips have a bit of water retention, so does the bark a little bit, but it's usually cocoa peat or tree fern fiber as the water retentive part. All I do is I switch around the volumes. The Oxalis, for example, was cocoa peat, perlite, a little bit of worm castings, but no chunky components like bark and cocoa chips and so on. Whereas these ones would be much chunkier, and look, like, you can probably see it better from above. It looks quite chunky with lots of perlite in it. Honestly, also depends on what I have available. You can make a really simple Aroid mix by just going out and buying a store-bought potting soil and adding perlite for aeration. But keep in mind that store-bought potting soils sometimes come with fungus nets or other pests in them, so I try and avoid them. What I actually do is I buy all of my things in bulk. Perlite, for example, I buy in like, I think 40-liter bags or something like that. Like more than that. Huge bags. I need a lot of Aroid mix, and I'm also the go-to person for Aroid mix for all of the people I know. All of my friends are like, can I get a bag of Aroid mix? Can I come and repot this plant and so on? So I probably only use about like, I don't know, 75% of the Aroid mix I actually make. I just give people Aroid mix here and there because I already have all components. So I know that if you only need a small amount of substrate, it can be a bit annoying to buy all of these components and then mix them together. That's why I do it in bulk, because I know I will ultimately use it. So I actually go to either pet stores, hydroponic stores, larger like wholesale suppliers, and buy things in bulk, which makes it much more cost effective. And I'm really fortunate to have a storage space downstairs, supposed to be the car space, but we don't have cars. So I just store all of my substrates over there. That's, by the way, also where I store all of my leftover pots and all of that. So of course I have a lot of these products because I've gone through so many moves and I have so many plants and projects going on all the time. I have a lot of leftover products, let's say, or products that I'm currently not using but will eventually use again and so on, right? But keep in mind, I'm also doing all of this on a bit of a different scale. This is my business, this is my job by now, right? I'm not just doing it as a hobby. I would definitely not have such an elaborate setup downstairs with all of these things in bulk if this was just a cute, innocent hobby. I store all of the components separately in just boxes that I got from Bunnings, and really important that I store all of them when they're dry so that there's no mold, spores, like having a field day before I even start using it. Storing it all separately gives me the ability to at all times put a mix together based on what I want from this mix. So that really depends on, I suppose, the plant that you bought. But if you just always keep water retention and aeration drainage, and you're trying to balance those two out based on the plant that you're trying to repot, you should have success. Now, the latest one out of all the components that I started using is worm castings. And worm castings are an interesting one because the worm castings that I've been using obviously have water retention. So for example, the oxalis really enjoyed it, but they also add another element, which is the nutrient provision. Good segue into that. So I mentioned that the substrate in itself doesn't necessarily have many nutrients. Neither does moss. So I'm really relying on nutrient provision with watering. Let me show you what I do. I have been using this product for I think 5 years now, and I am actually experimenting with some other products, just so you know, but this product is working. The biggest problem with this product is probably the distribution internationally. It's an Australian company, so they're first and foremost available in Australia, but there is a distributor in the US as well, and I actually have a discount code for you guys in the description as well. Growth Technology Foliage Focus has always been a nutrient that I've been using, like ever since you guys know my social media channel, and that is because it has the essential minerals bioavailable in the right ratio to focus on foliage growth, which is what I enjoy. There's a full range where you can focus on growing veggies or chilies or natives or blooms, orchids and so on, right? I obviously have the foliage focus one, and I just go with the recommendation on the bottle. It just says for soil potting mix, use 3 to 5 milliliters per liter of water. Use at each watering for optimal results. Flush monthly with plain water. That's exactly what I do. I didn't make this up. I'm just going with the recommendations on the bottle. So if you don't use this specific product, I would recommend that you just look at the recommended dosage on that specific product and go in line with that. I suppose, I mean, maybe sometimes they put this on here to upsell their product a little bit as well. Maybe you can go a little bit weaker. But at the end of the day, I suppose they designed and tested it, so they know best how to apply it. So when I say I use a weak dilution, I just mean I refer to the 3 millimeters rather than the 5 to 6 to 7 millimeters per liter of water. So about 3 milliliters per liter of water with every watering, unless I take it outside and hoist them down. I also just have a little pipette so that I can actually measure. By now, I'll wing it a little bit more, but you know, I've done it for so many years. I kind of have an understanding of what 3 milliliters looks like, and I have an understanding of how dark the water should look like later on. You know what I mean? Like I feel like I know what I'm doing by now. The other product from GT that I like to use is GT CCS, which is Clonex Clone Solution. Basically, this one doesn't focus so much on the leaf health, but rather just focus on reducing stress. It has a lot of E vitamins in it, so if your plants go through stress because of a repot, because of a move, because of a change in conditions, because of whatever might have happened, this will help the plant build resilience and come back from the shock. So I usually use this after propagations or with smaller plants that I want to establish in my collection, but I very quickly move on from this and move on to foliage focus. So I don't think it's necessarily essential, but if you do a lot of propagations or you know that for whatever reasons your plants are introduced to a lot of stress, this could be a good one for you. And then there's the Root Zone, which is the latest product of their range that I use. It's not, I think it's been out for 2 years or so by now. This is an organic product. The other two were mineral. So this one basically has all of the additives. So the 12 essential minerals in Foliage Focus is basically what the plant needs to actually survive. The additives in here, like amino acids, fulvic acid, thiamine and potassium, basically aren't essential. So in itself, this is not going to make the plant grow, but it helps the plant grow further. And specifically, it optimizes the root growth of the plant. And once you have roots, leaves will be inevitable. I don't use this all too often because it has a little bit of a smell and I'm very sensitive to smell. It is organic and I don't usually like organic fertilizers for that reason. Outside it's fine, but I don't necessarily need my house to smell like fish. It actually evaporates really quickly, but I don't necessarily want to overdo it and pour too much of that over my moss piles. Yeah, it's definitely earthy. So I use this maybe once a month and it just comes at 1 milliliter per liter. Now 0.5 milliliters, oh my god, I was overdosing. 0.5 milliliters per liter of water for cuttings and seedlings. For juvenile plants, 1 milliliter per liter of water. Okay. And it's to be used in conjunction with the GT Foliage Focus. An additive, an option if you want to level up a little bit further. Essential, optional, essential, optional. Okay. So that's kind of how I like to explain it. Bottom line though is I just recommend a liquid nutrient. A liquid nutrient can be provided via watering, so you consistently provide it. And a nutrient isn't required to be broken down. Often fertilizers, for example, you know, people always talk about NPK, but those are just 3 out of 12 essential minerals that the plant actually needs. So we are relying on bacteria or some sort of processes to break down all of the components into the 12 essential minerals. Sounds like a lot of work. If we can just provide the 12 minerals bioavailable in the right portion already via this. So that's why I like it, and it's basically like I'm microdosing my plants. With every watering, I'm providing it with the nutrients that it needs to grow, and it's obviously been working really, really well for me. Now, the last thing that I use here, and it's not really nutrient, but tendon drops I have recently started using, and that was on the back of having a fungus gnat infestation. You shouldn't experience fungus gnat infestations if all of the components for your Aroid mix were sterilized before you introduced them, but didn't realize that the tree fern fiber wasn't, so I had to buy this, and I just started using it with every watering just to prevent them, and I haven't had any ever since I started using this. So I think this is really good. This is also something I could put in like a water feature outside to eliminate mosquitoes and so on. So tendon drops are great to prevent fungus gnats. Treat them once you've got them, and then also to prevent them going further. So I do that as well. So what I actually do is I have a big watering can that I fill up with water, and then I mix all of my things in there, my foliage focus, sometimes my root zone and my tendon drops. I mix it all together, and then I bottle it up into 1 liter bottles. As you can see, they've gone through lots of rounds of nutrient provision. They are so dirty and filthy by now. I love it. At least stops me from using them as water bottles for myself by accident by now. Anyway, so I mix it into a big watering can just because the tendon drops I only need 2 drops per 5 liters. So I didn't want to overdose and do it straight into the bottles, but you could technically do that too. So I just do it in a big watering can, mix like, I don't know, 10 liters at a time, and then I pour it into these water bottles. And then I have 2 cupboards, one in the kitchen and one in my office, where I have, I think 10 bottles each sitting in the cupboard, already pre-filled, already with the nutrients in it, so that when I see a pole being dry, for example, I crunch, like, ooh, this pole is dry, I take the bottle and I flip it upside down and I let gravity do the rest for me. Easy peasy. Let's water moss poles. First, you need a water bottle with some holes in the lid, and you need to make a little cavity at the top of your moss pole that fits the neck of your bottle perfectly. So I just flip it upside down, and from here on, I'll let gravity do the rest for me. The moss makes contact with the water through those little holes, which breaks the surface tension, but at the same time, it is controlling how fast the water is being released. You want the release of water to be slower than the absorption of water by the moss. And 30 minutes later, you want to check the planter to make sure there's no excess water accumulating. That's it. Follow me for part 2, where we discuss the why and when. Part 2 of watering moss poles. Why and when? Well, first, why? It's to encourage root growth. The moss pole is like a growing medium. It's a vertical extension of your pot. When is a little trickier. The frequency changes, but one stays the same. Keep the moss pole moist, and I use a crunch test to test it. If you squeeze the moss pole and it makes no sound, it's still moist. If you squeeze the moss pole and it's crunchy, then it's time to flip a bottle upside down and water that moss pole. But what if the bottom of the pole is still moist, but the top of the pole is crunchy? Well, you can take your bottle and just fill it with half as much water. Flip it upside down and it won't be enough water to drain all the way through. And my top tips to avoid overwatering is number 1, a chunky Aroid mix, and number 2, less water, but more frequent watering. This way, I don't have to procrastinate. When I see a pole that needs watering, the water is already here, ready, nutrients mixed in, flip it up, so I have no excuse. I'm using economies of scale. If I would have to fill up a bottle then put nutrients in it, and then put it on the plant. Every time I notice that, I would definitely not stay on top of my watering. And it could be that small little thing that actually turns watering from a chore into something that just happens naturally. In the morning, I walk around with my coffee, I look at the plants that need a bottle upside down, and I flip a bottle upside down, and it takes like 10 seconds. The gravity is going to do all of it by itself, and then I'm done. Just need to check that eventually there's no excess water accumulating in the pot. But I've been doing this for so many years by now. I have a really good understanding how much water each pole needs. There is no rule, it's a feeling, right? It depends on how big the plant is, how dry the pole is, how big the pole is, how much moss is in the pole, or is there a different medium in the pole, how dry is the environment that it's in, and so on, right? So I can't give you a volume of water, but I have developed like a bit of a sixth sense in relation to that. But I do like these 1 liter bottles, and I like these Fiji water bottles because they're quite sturdy. What I do is I drill holes in the top, and the holes will ensure that the water is released slowly. It's gonna be a very easy process. If the water releases slower, then the moss can absorb it. So you don't want it to just come pouring out, hence a few holes, but you also don't want all of the holes to be blocked so that nothing comes out. So I have a few of them, and I put it upside down onto a pole, and then I wiggle around until I'm happy with the release of water that I see based on the bubbles that are coming out. Guess what? I've got a full tutorial on how to water a moss pole. But when people comment and say that watering a moss pole is impossible and so on, I'm pretty certain that either they messed up when it comes to the pole, so they didn't choose the right pole, they didn't put enough moss in it, it's not thick enough, it's not plastic bagged, or they're trying to spray the outside. Dry moss is hydrophobic, it's just going to pearl off, make a mess, and feels like you're achieving absolutely nothing. Water it thoroughly from the inside out, making use of gravity. You know, so you don't have to actively be involved. And the other thing, ironically, I've only been using water bottles for the first 5 years or so. Only last year I started using watering cans, and watering cans are actually also really handy. I always have a watering can with my nutrients already mixed in, so that if I see a plant that's not on a moss pole that needs watering, no excuses, right? So it's really about setting future Jan up for success. And while I fill all of these bottles, I just call AJ and we have a little whinge about life, you know? Now I call people and I do that. It's easy, you know what I mean? Like, I can do that, but it definitely makes it so much faster and stops you from procrastinating. And you know what? They're for free. I used them as water bottles before, and then I just recycled them. So you don't need to have like an elaborate self-watering setup or drip setup, or I don't think you need to over-engineer your moss pole to have like a PVC pipe in the middle and then a wick and then self-watering and all of this thing. Now we're just buying more products and we're overcomplicating the construction, which means we're going to overcomplicate the extension and the chopping and all of that. I keep it really simple. My moss poles are just filled with moss, and I just water the moss. The more moss, the more water it can absorb, the less it's going to dry out. 50% of your moss pole is a PVC pipe, then what exactly is going to actually absorb and maintain the moisture? But again, I think I have tutorials where I'm very passionate about these things, where you can easily find out more. Alright, from nutrients, let's move on to pest treatment. Disclaimer, I hate pest treatment. Not just the act of doing it, I also hate talking about it, because I have to admit, I just don't have enough knowledge around it. I don't know what you should use, what you shouldn't use. Different countries have different rules. Certain products are banned in certain countries, and in others they're readily available, and you can just buy them at the shops, right? I'm assuming if I can buy them, then somebody else has done the due diligence on whether or not I'm allowed to use them. I will use them in line with the direction on the bottles and so on, but ultimately I have very limited knowledge around exactly what is the best way of treating pests. That is not my area of expertise. Showing you what I do, that's not necessarily endorsement for that. Thinking about it logically, natural pest treatment would be my preference. Have predatory mites or something like that. But I also share this house with somebody who's not obsessed with plants. And if I tell my housemate that I'm about to release thousands of bugs into our apartment, she is gonna kick me out. Yeah. So I gotta be respectful of that as well. And to be honest, I don't necessarily feel amazing about the idea of like purposely releasing bugs. If they find their way in here, so be it, right? I'm not opposed to that. But I'm not gonna go out there and buy and then release them in my living room. Maybe one day if I live by myself and I had a bit more time to think about it, but for now, not so much. realistically, I really only deal with 2 pests. I deal with thrips and I deal with spider mites. Those are the only 2 I've ever really dealt with. I've had like aphids outside before. I had rust and something outside. But indoors, spider mites or thrips. For thrips, I use contender spray. And honestly, I just Google contender spray and always just buy whichever one has it on sale at the time. And for spider mites, I've recently started using kill-a-mite. Is it working? A little bit. Do I still need to treat my fry deck for spider mites once a month? Yes. I have a huge sprayer that's like battery operated that holds 15 liters. So I actually put that in there, and then that sprayer also has decent oomph, you know, like it actually cleans the leaves and wipes the pests off, as well as distribute the pest treatment as well. So that made life really easy because I have a lot of plants, you know. If I would have to have like a little hand pump, that would be really, really time consuming. So I really enjoy that electric sprayer that I've got from Aroid, and I got that one from Bunnings as well. But I can understand that if you don't have quite as many plants, you might not have the need for such a huge machine. I initially actually bought it to provide nutrients to my plants when watering the greenhouse, but I found that the pressure that it gives up to be perfect to actually clean the leaves and do pest treatment at the same time. So that's what I do, and it makes things really easy. And knowing that I have that machine out there, like I just feel if I see pests, I'm just like, okay, let's go, let's do it now, right? Rather than like, oh my god, it's gonna be so painful, I need to pump and then like spray for 700 hours or like wipe. I don't shine leaves, I don't wipe leaves, I just spray them with water. And that is really also why I think I've been quite lucky with pest treatment overall. I don't do much pest treatment because I'm always doing a decent job at keeping my plants clean, just with water, so they're naturally fighting off the pests a little bit better. Sorry, just when I put the pest treatment back into their shelf, I love a good shelf, I also found this. I was actually sent some samples of worm casting granulates. I only got them sent last week, so I have not used them yet at all, but I suppose this is kind of like a slow release fertilizer equivalent, but organic version. So I'm really excited to start using them. I have them in a small sample, and then I have a larger granulate as well. Over here, slightly larger granulate. So I'm really excited to use them. I think this will be a really good way of providing nutrients to my garden bed, for example. Yeah, overall, I want to try experiment with that a little bit more, because I've had a lot of questions from people asking for organic fertilizers instead, because historically my recommendation was always to provide the mineral nutrients GT Foliage focus, but it's not available everywhere. But I suppose worm castings is an organic product, doesn't necessarily need to be a specific brand, you know what I mean? I mean, this is an Australian brand called Verasoil, which I have used their worm castings before and I've been loving it. But if I talk about that, you know what I mean? Like, you can very easily just find your own worm castings wherever you're from. It doesn't need to be from that specific brand. So I want to try this product because I feel like it is going to be more transferable to other markets, if that makes sense, rather than being so specific about a specific company with a specific product like GT Foliage Focus. Alrighty, and then lastly, these are kind of just some like little gimmicks here and there. I recently did a video about how I use a chopstick. Let's just put that video in so I don't need to repeat it. See this over here and how it's starting to come off the pole? That's not what we want. We want this plant to be in the middle of the pole over here. So what I can do is I can take a chopstick and use the grid and be like, oh, I want you to go here. Now make sure that the chopstick comes out the end as well, so that the plant can't push it away. Earlier it was sticking out in the side, now it's no longer sticking out. And as soon as there's roots going in here, I can then get rid of the chopstick. So it's not going to stay in here forever, but I found this to actually be the least intrusive way of managing the growth. This is the extension. Remember my little chopstick trick? That worked a treat. The plant has since managed to grow into the extension, so the extension starts from here. So anything from here upwards is new growth, and we can see some roots going into the pole as well, and now with the newest nodes as well. I could just repeat the chopstick trick just to kind of keep it in that spot that I want it to be in, but it looks to have found that spot more naturally now anyway. There we go. By the way, this also works with plastic bagged moss poles. Just with plastic bagged moss poles, you don't have the advantage of it coming out the other end, which means that if it's a really thick plant, the plant might push this chopstick over a little bit. So you might have to just go one grid at a time, you know, like slower, because yeah, I hope that made sense, but it still works. Don't use wooden ones. I just found a wooden one in the cupboard just now, but don't use wooden ones, they will rot. Use plastic ones if you can. Similar principle behind it, but a little bit more permanent, and not my preference, is a cable tie. You can also take a cable tie and then tie the stem to it. I've actually done this down here, for example. Now usually I don't see the need to cable tie them because the plant should find its way onto it by itself. I suppose the cable tie isn't necessarily holding it onto the pole, it is more so making sure that it grows into a specific part of the pole that you want it to. But the problem over here is that if you make the cable tie too tight, the stem might actually thicken up in hindsight, and then you're kind of strangling the plant a little bit. So you want to avoid making the cable tie too tight, and ultimately you don't need it. Once the plant is rooted, you can just get rid of it. So I feel like with the chopstick it's easier. Once the plant is rooted, you just take the chopstick out and just put it higher up. Doesn't necessarily work with cable ties, but they are obviously really strong and they take advantage of the grit that you used as well. The other thing that I do sometimes in managing plants growth on a moss pole is just having a piece of wire that is shaped as a U, and then you can take your growth point and be like, oh, I want you to go here. Now with this one, this plant for example would just push this tiny pin out, so I would need a bigger pin. Depends on how thick the stem is, whether or not this is going to provide enough support. But basically this is also just really taking a piece of a stem and saying, hey, I want you to be here. And then so be it. And this one is, yeah, and I mean this one is just a piece of leftover wire from when I make the moss poles that I started using. But these have come in really handy over the years for sure, but more for small plants. Once your plant get a little bit thicker and harder to manipulate, I do prefer those, and only in really, really bad instances I go ahead and use the cable ties. I think that's it. I think this is all of the products that I like to use. Pretty sure. I'm sure I'll eventually realize that I forgot some and we might need to do part 2, but I also really focused on just indoor growing today, and a lot of these products is nothing that you absolutely need, but a lot of these products might make your life a little bit easier or might help you have success with your plants. But again, please remember all of the disclaimers that I gave initially. This is just what I like to do, heavily based on the plants that I like to grow in the environment that I have to offer, with the shops and the products available over here in Australia. Could be a completely different ball game wherever you are, but hopefully you still found a few interesting tips or tricks kind of scattered throughout the video. So I would love for you to leave a comment down below with like, what was your favorite tip or trick, and did I miss anything? Is there something that you do that you reckon other people could benefit from as well? Let me know in the comment section down below. Also make sure to check out all of the other videos and products that I was referring to. They should all be linked in the description, and if there's no link in the description, it means that I don't have a link in the first place, because I just go into the shops and buy it in good old fashion. It's time to say goodbye. Baby, you have done absolutely nothing but sleep. Baby? Baby, you're just sleeping still. I wish I had your life. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel and click on the bell so you get a notification every time I upload a new video, and hopefully I'll see you very soon.